Hello and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm your host, Sandra Babu-Boateng. So today we're tackling a powerful and complex issue that's gaining momentum worldwide. We're talking about reparations for slavery. Leaders from Africa, the Caribbean, and African American communities are making a strong and renewed push for justice. But is this movement realistic? Is this dream attainable? And what really needs to happen for it to become a reality? Before we get into it, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss another critical conversation like the one we're about to have. Okay, guys, so let's set the stage, right? In 2025, the African Union declared justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations as their theme for the year. Now, this decision made during the 37th Ordinary Assembly in Addis Ababa last year underscores a continent-wide commitment to addressing historical injustices. Here is John Mahama, president of Ghana, speaking at the 38th AU Summit, which took place on February 15th, 2025, on their theme for this year.
It's a privilege to address this historic launch of the African Union theme of the year 2025, and I quote, "Justice for Africans and the people of African descent through reparations," unquote. This moment marks a significant milestone in our collective pursuit of justice, equity, and the long overdue recognition of the historical injustices that continue to shape the lives of Africans and the people of African descent worldwide. At the 37th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of the African Union in February 2024, our heads of state and government made a landmark decision to dedicate the year 2025 to the cause of reparatory justice. This decision underscores our collective commitment to addressing the historical injustices and their lingering consequences that have impacted generations of Africans and people of African descent.
Meanwhile, over in the Caribbean, leaders are amplifying their voices as well. Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell of Grenada recently urged European nations to issue formal apologies and provide reparations for their roles in the transatlantic slave trade. Addressing European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, he emphasized that acknowledging slavery as a crime against humanity is a crucial step toward healing. Take a listen.
Your Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, I don't mean to be impolite, but I will say to you, therefore, that the issue of reparations for the transatlantic slavery and the enslavement of African peoples and black bodies, as my comrade Ralph likes to say, is an issue that we will take up with you. And we are doing so in the hands of partnership, and we are doing so in the cause of humanity. Because as long as we do not openly and explicitly reject the idea that one human being can own another human being, we run the risk that that idea may somehow take root again and be allowed to flourish and happen again in the world. And so as descendants of people who fought for their freedom from chattel slavery, we owe it to ourselves and to future generations of humanity to ensure that the transatlantic slave trade and the enslavement of Africans in the Caribbean, Latin, Central, South, and North America is accepted as a crime against humanity, and that the appropriate apology and compensation is paid, and that the international community accepts that this should never happen again.
And then across the Atlantic, in the United States, the fight continues. Following the passing of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who was a staunch advocate for reparations, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has taken up the mantle, and she is leading the charge to push forward legislation that seeks to study and develop reparatory proposals for African Americans. Take a listen.
We're at a critical inflection point in America, and the moment cannot be more urgent. With Black history under attack and white supremacy emboldened, there is no better time to introduce this bill than during Black History Month, a time when we reflect on our history, our struggle, and our collective power. And I'll say, it is also not only about Black history, but it is about Black futures. More than 4 centuries ago, Africans were kidnapped, trafficked, and enslaved, forced to build this country under horrific brutality, an economy which we still benefit from today. Rice, sugar, tobacco, cotton. And even after the Civil War, emancipation, and the 13th Amendment, the legacy of slavery endured in other forms, codified in law to deny Black Americans freedom, opportunity, and dignity. And that's what brings us here today. This brutality, these injustices, these horrors were not things just happened within the culture by osmosis. They were legislated. Today, with Donald Trump and Republicans waging their coordinated and at times unlawful assault on Black folks and Black history, we will not allow that history to be erased. We will not allow it to be whitewashed. H.R. 40 is a powerful reminder of the work that remains and offers us a pathway toward truth, reconciliation, and accountability. To be clear, this bill is not a symbolic gesture, but rather a meaningful step toward repairing the deep structural injustices that continue to harm Black communities today. The racial wealth gap in America is not an accident, and it is specifically the result of slavery and the anti-Black society that followed. From Jim Crow to redlining to mass incarceration, our government, through policies and budgets, has perpetuated and entrenched these harms for generations. The disparities that we see in health outcomes, housing, education, wealth, and more are by design. Today, our government has a moral and legal obligation to right those wrongs, and reparations are a necessary step towards achieving justice.
And so this trifecta of efforts, right, from Africa, the Caribbean, and the U.S., signifies a global movement that is demanding recognition and redress for centuries of exploitation. To understand the present demands, we need to really revisit the past. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly removed an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans from their homeland between the 15th and 19th centuries. Now, these individuals were subjected to unimaginable horrors, and their labor built the economic foundations of many Western nations. In the Caribbean, enslaved Africans transformed colonies into profitable sugar and tobacco producers. The wealth generated fueled the Industrial Revolution in Europe, while the Caribbean nations were left grappling with underdevelopment and economic dependency. In the United States, the institution of slavery provided the backbone for the country's early economy, especially in the cotton and tobacco industries. The legacy of slavery has resulted in systemic inequalities that persist to this day, affecting African American communities profoundly. And, Africa, on the other hand, it suffered a massive depletion of its population and workforce. The social fabric was torn apart, and the continent faced economic stagnation, which made it vulnerable to subsequent phases of colonization and exploitation. So given this history, right, the call for reparations isn't just about addressing past wrongs. It's about really rectifying ongoing disparities that stem from these injustices. And in the words of Prime Minister Mitchell, ensuring that this atrocious act does not ever happen again. Given this context, are the calls for reparations justified? Many argue that acknowledging and compensating for historical injustices is a moral imperative. So the CARICOM Reparations Commission has laid out a 10-point plan that is seeking measures ranging from formal apologies to debt cancellation and technology transfer. Critics, however, question the feasibility and fairness of reparations. They raise questions about identifying beneficiaries, determining compensation forms, and addressing the roles of African entities involved in the slave trade. Ultimately, the justification for reparations hinges on one's perspective on historical accountability and the mechanisms for rectifying systemic wrongs. So, how have the nations implicated in these historical injustices responded? The reactions have been largely resistant. For instance, the British government has stated that reparations for its involvement in the slave trade are, quote unquote, not on the agenda, despite increasing pressure from Commonwealth nations. And then over in France, you have President Macron, who has ruled out reparations, calling for reconciliation instead. What does that mean? And then just recently at the CARICOM summit, while the EU president, Ursula von der Leyen, acknowledged that slavery was a crime against humanity, she didn't mention any notable action that would attempt to address the wrong.
And most respected voices in the fight against climate change and to protect nature. We made history together with the Paris Agreement and the Loss and Damage Fund. We have championed together a bold reform of the global financial architecture to address the climate crisis, lift more people out of poverty, and end food insecurity. You have spearheaded this work, including through the Bridgetown Initiative. And then, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, you were the first regional bloc to stand with Ukraine, with Europe, and with international law. And you did it because of your unwavering values compass. But also because of a lawless world where might makes right is just more dangerous for everyone. You have constantly and consistently called for just peace, not only in Ukraine, but also in the Middle East, in Gaza, in Sudan, and in Haiti. And yes, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, slavery is a crime against humanity.
Yep, that was it. Nothing else to be said. So while institutions and governments have issued formal apologies or acknowledged their roles, tangible commitments to reparatory justice remain limited. However, there's something different about what's happening that may move things in a different direction this time. There is global solidarity with a unified stance from Africa, from the Caribbean, and African Americans. This strengthens the movement, right? Making it harder to ignore. There is institutional support with organizations like the African Union, CARICOM, and U.S. Congress pushing reparations into mainstream political discussions. But more importantly, there are precedents for this that we need to lean in. Countries like Germany have paid reparations for the Holocaust, and the U.S. has issued compensation to Japanese Americans for internment camps. These cases show that reparations can happen under the right conditions. So, where does that leave us? The truth is, this fight will take time, it will take strategy, and relentless pressure. Reparations won't be handed out willingly. History has shown us that justice is something we have to demand and that we have to fight for. And the big question now is, how far are African nations, Caribbean leaders, and African Americans willing to go? Will they take legal action, economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure? At the end of the day, reparations aren't just about money, right? They're about acknowledging the truth and repairing damage and ensuring that Africa and its diaspora are no longer left at a disadvantage because of history. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you think reparations are justified? Do you think they will ever become a reality? Or will the resistance from former colonizers be too strong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. That's it for today's breakdown. If you found this episode insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. Until next time, take care.